It's Easter Sunday, and the most powerful being alive is standing in front of a camera calling himself the father of the nation. Behind him is a country that mostly agrees. The people who don't agree are in camps. The Seven, the team that made him famous, doesn't exist anymore because he decided it didn't need to. He isn't wearing the old smile, the bright one from the commercials, the one that used to sell breakfast cereal and military recruitment in the same breath. He doesn't need it now. He has everything the smile was ever, for he did not become this. He did not get stronger. His body could always melt a person into a stain on the pavement. His eyes could always cut a plane in half. From the first frame of his life to this one, the raw capability never moved by a single degree. What changed is the number of people willing to stand in front of him and say no. That number spent 5 seasons falling towards 0, and on Easter Sunday it finally hit the floor. This is where the story ends. And the ending is not Homelander becoming something new, some final upgrade in the last act. It is the last leash coming off, the one nobody could quite see. And once it is gone, there is nothing left standing between him and the thing he always was. He wasn't born. That word doesn't fit. He was produced. Grown in a Vought lab, raised by technicians in white coats who fed him, measured him and hurt him to find out how much he could take. There was no mother, no crib, no lullaby, no single person in that building whose job was to love him instead of study him. He had the body of a god before he could form a sentence, and inside it, a child who had never once been held for no reason. And they didn't raise him so much as run him. They told him he was chosen, the pinnacle, humanity's next step. And they told him this while feeling nothing for him at all. So the praise and the coldness arrived, fused together until he couldn't pull them apart. He learned that being called special and being loved were 2 different things, and that he could have a limitless supply of the first and none of the second, which is a strange, precise kind of damage to build into a weapon. They kept him alone, the only one of his kind that mattered. No siblings, no equals, no one to measure himself against, except the adults holding the clipboards. So he grew up certain he was above everyone, and terrified he was nothing, with none of the ordinary childhood that might have sanded either feeling down. They dangled the approval and withdrew it, testing what a boy would become if you handed him a god's power and starved the human part on purpose. There was no version of that childhood where he came out whole. There was only the question of exactly which way he'd break. So what comes out the other end is a god whose defining trait is that he needs to be told he's good, told he's special and loved and the best, and if he isn't told, he comes apart like a toddler who missed a nap, except the toddler can level a city block. The most powerful individual on earth, and the hole at the centre of him, is shaped exactly like a parent. Everything he does for the rest of his life is an attempt to fill it, and every attempt is a different relationship, and every one of them fails in a new way, but for years he does none of it, and the reason isn't strength. Something holds him. A man named Stan Edgar, no powers. An accountant's posture and a good suit sits across a boardroom table from the most powerful being who has ever lived and tells him flatly that he is not a god. He's a product. Vought is a pharmaceutical company. Homelander is the merchandise, and merchandise doesn't get opinions about the people who own it. And Homelander, who could turn Edgar into a smear on the wall between one word and the next, takes it, sits there and takes it. The strongest thing on the planet, held in place by a man whose only weapon is that he refuses to be afraid, and everyone else in the building has clocked the arrangement, which is why they tiptoe. The staff manage their faces around him, the other supers measure their words. The whole company runs on a quiet understanding that you do not set him off, and that eggshell walk is its own kind of proof that the thing keeping the peace is not respect. It's a room full of people privately terrified, and one old man who has decided to act like he isn't. And it isn't only Vought that should be able to check him. There's a government, a military, a whole architecture of institutions that in theory answer to no single person, and one by one they look at what saying no to him would cost and quietly decline to pay it. The senators who should regulate him want his endorsement. The generals who should fear him want him aimed at their enemies. Every institution built to stop exactly this kind of thing turns out to be full of people who'd rather have him on their side than do their job. So the only real check in the whole country stays that one unafraid old man, which is a terrifyingly thin thing for a civilization to be standing on. But a leash like that lasts exactly as long as he believes in it. Madeline Stilwell ran him the same way for years, calm, unbothered, soothing the tantrums like weather, and the day he understands the calm was management, that she was steering a product and not loving a son, the composure stops reading as strength and starts reading as contempt. The unafraid can hold him right up until he decides their steadiness was a lie the whole time, and then it holds nothing, so he learns the lessons backwards. By the time he goes home to the lab that grew him, he isn't there to escape the people who were never scared of him. He's there to kill them. He murders the technicians who raised him as a specimen, the last people alive who ever looked at him like a thing to be studied instead of a god to be adored. And when they're gone, so is the last hand that could ever hold the leash. He doesn't win his freedom. He clears the room of everyone qualified to say no and calls the quiet that's left love. That's the first thing to understand about how he's held, and the second is that a lot of the holding isn't a person at all. It's an image, and the image is a factory. A Homelander rescue doesn't begin with a burning building. It begins with a decision. A situation is identified, a crew is positioned, the light is right, and then the hero arrives to be filmed arriving, and the whole thing is cut into 90 seconds of a nation's favourite son doing what he was built to do. The cape, the flag, the teeth, none of it is incidental. It's the product. And Vought runs the assembly line, and the factory doesn't just manufacture heroism, it manufactures intimacy, which is the more dangerous product. He's coached to seem human, handed talk show couches and softball interviews and rehearsed little vulnerabilities, scripted moments of relatability designed so 100 million strangers feel like they personally know him. None of it is real. The warmth is a focus grouped output, tuned and tested like a flavour. But it works, and the country's love for him is built on a man who does not exist, an approachable everyman wrapped around something that cannot be approached at all. So when they cheer for Homelander, they're cheering for a character Vought wrote, and the thing wearing the character knows it and hates them a little for loving the fake instead of him. And past the intimacy, the machine builds him into something bigger than a celebrity. It builds him into a piece of the country itself. His face is on the recruitment posters and the movie screens and the stadium flyovers, his name stitched into what the nation thinks it is, until loving America and loving Homelander run through the same wire. That's not an accident. It's the most valuable thing Vought ever made, because a man you can question is a problem and a symbol you were raised to salute is not. By the time anyone might want to stop him, stopping him feels like an attack on the flag, which is exactly how you build a thing no one is allowed to take down. But a manufactured hero has a manufacturing cost, which is that he has to keep being adored or the line shuts down. He needs the crowds, the merchandise, the approval numbers, the way an engine needs fuel, and that need is a leash too, softer than Edgar's but longer lasting, because it comes from inside. He'll swallow almost anything to protect the image, because the image is the thing that lets him walk around in the open being loved instead of feared, and then the floor drops out, because the country finds out the heroes were grown in a lab, the secret that supers aren't born, that there's no gift from above, just a compound injected into infants and a marketing department, gets out, and the fairy tale that Homelander is a miracle turns into the fact that Homelander is a supply chain. He was never chosen, he was manufactured to spec and sold with a good story, and now everyone knows. and something that never quite heals cracks the day the miracle becomes a product. Recall, the image has a body count and it starts on a plane. A commercial flight gets hijacked, and for a moment it looks like the real save, the genuine article, the hero moment the entire brand is built on. Homelander and Maeve are in the cabin, and this is it, the thing the 90-second edits only pretend to be. But then it goes wrong. The controls are gone, the plane is coming down no matter what anyone does, and there's no clean way to get a cabin full of people out of a falling aircraft. So he does the math, live in real time. If he tries and fails in front of witnesses, if even one survivor lives to say the great Homelander couldn't save them, the myth takes a wound, and a wounded myth is worse to him than a crashed plane. So he steps back, he leaves them. He lets a plane full of screaming people fall out of the sky because a crash with no survivors protects the story better than a rescue that might go wrong. And then he walks into a press conference, arranges his face into grief, and talks about how he wishes he could have been there. Maeve was standing right there, and it destroys her. She carries that plane for seasons, drinks to drown it, lets it corrode her from the inside because she helped let those people die. He carries nothing. He isn't haunted, he's mildly annoyed it was a close call, and the emptiness where her guilt lives is the clearest look at the missing part. Same act, two people, and only one of them has anywhere for it to land, because under the mask is the kid from the lab, and that kid spends the whole show trying to hire a mother. That's what Stillwell really is to him, underneath the corporate arrangement. Not a boss. A casting choice. He takes the woman whose actual job is to manage his image and quietly promotes her, in his own head, into the parent he was never issued. He brings her his problems like a child bringing home a drawing. He wants her approval for the smallest things. He arranges to be praised by her, and it all builds to the scene where the deadliest man alive drinks her breast milk, played dead straight, no wink, no music cue telling you to laugh, which is so much worse than if it had. The most powerful being in the world, reaching to be mothered by his handler. You can laugh at it. You should. Then remember the giant baby can boil the ocean. But some part of him knows it's counterfeit. A shapeshifter wearing Stillwell's face gets close to him and whispers the thing that sounds like mercy, that he doesn't need everyone to love him, that the need is beneath him, and he kills her for it. He kills the comfort for naming the thing out loud, because the one wound he cannot survive having touched is that one. He would rather destroy the person soothing him than let anyone say what the soothing is for. So the counterfeit can't hold, and the second the real Stillwell stops playing the role, the second it's clear she was managing a product and not loving a son, he burns her out of his life without slowing down. You can install a mother, you cannot make her real. And when the performance drops, there's nothing underneath to mourn, only a reason to stop pretending he was ever being held. The need runs deepest in the moments no one else is in the room. Alone, with no one to perform for, he talks to himself, narrates his own greatness to an empty apartment, runs the praise on a loop because he cannot survive its absence even for an evening. The most powerful being alive, standing over a sleeping city, quietly telling himself the things he needs to hear because there is no longer anyone he trusts to tell him. That's the engine with the cover off. It isn't a plan and it isn't malice, it's a hunger, and it runs whether or not anyone is watching. The manufactured mother fails. So for the only time in the whole story, he tries the opposite. Instead of hiring a parent, he goes looking for a real one and tries, for once, to be a son. He finds the man he was made from, Soldier Boy, the older super whose genetic material built him. And for a moment there's finally an equal in the room, someone old enough to understand what it is to be this, and strong enough for once to actually hurt him. The hope is all over him, the same hope from the lab, the boy looking up, wanting the one thing. And his father looks at the most powerful being alive, his own creation, and tells him he's weak, needy, a disappointment, that the hunger to be loved is pathetic. This is worse than Stillwell and different. Stillwell was a counterfeit that broke. This is the real thing, the actual source, the one man genuinely qualified to fill the hole, reaching into it and telling him the hole is his own fault. And there's a second thing that meeting does, past the insult. Soldier Boy hits him, really hits him, and for the first time in the whole show something lands, the invulnerable body meeting a force that doesn't bounce off, and it flickers across his face, the thing he's spent his entire life making sure no one ever sees. Fear. The god is afraid, and worse, he retreats, the most powerful being alive, choosing to run because the alternative might actually cost him something. It's small, easy to miss under the family drama, but the coward in that fight is the man who turns up again at the very end on his knees on live television, begging. So he does the only thing left, which is turn on the father to protect the boy, and that turn is the hinge of his whole life. He stops trying to be a son. He starts trying to be the father he never had. And you already know he's going to do it wrong, because no one ever showed him what the right version looks like. His son exists because he assaulted Butcher's wife, Becca, a woman who wanted nothing to do with him, and who then spent years hiding the child for one reason, to keep the boy from becoming his father. She raised Ryan off the grid in a quiet house built for exactly one purpose, to give him the childhood Homelander never had, so he'd turn out human. And here the wound reproduces instead of healing. Homelander forces his way in, and what he calls fathering is recruitment. Come stand next to me. See what you can do. Be what I am. He can't hand the boy warmth. So he hands him the only inheritance he actually owns, which is power with nothing attached to it. And there's a moment where Ryan uses his abilities and Homelander lights up with plain fatherly pride. A dad watching his kid show a gift, except the gift is being unstoppable, and for a long stretch it's a tug of war, because Ryan keeps slipping the leash and going back to the people who raised him gentle, and Homelander keeps pulling him back. And the pulling isn't all menace, which is what makes it sick. There's real tenderness in it, or the closest thing he can manufacture, a father genuinely wanting his son near him. But the wanting and the controlling are the same gesture for him, because he has never once been shown a version of love that wasn't also a leash. So every time he reaches for the boy with something like warmth, his hand closes into a grip, and the grooming half works, which is the horror of it. There are moments where the coaching lands and you catch a flash of Homelander in the boy's face, a casual willingness to hurt, the family resemblance showing up in the worst possible place. But every time something pulls him back, a hesitation, a flinch, a look. Afterward, like he's frightened of himself. His father keeps trying to coach the flinch out of him, calls it weakness, the exact word Soldier Boy used on him, and the boy keeps failing to learn the lesson. The son is being built into a weapon, and the weapon keeps developing a conscience the manufacturer never ordered, but the boy comes with a cost the father can't design around, and her name is Becca. She dies because of the exact power Homelander is so proud of. In the chaos of a fight trying to protect his mother, Ryan loses control of what he can do, and a stray blast kills her. The one person who built her whole life around keeping him human, killed by the inhuman thing in him, using the power his father celebrates. And Homelander, handed a grieving child, does the opposite of comfort. He tells Ryan it's fine, that accidents happen, that people like them don't answer for the bodies, and he sets about dissolving the guilt. Because a son who feels things is no use to him, except the guilt won't dissolve, and that's the one thing he can't fix. Ryan keeps flinching. His father beats him nearly to death at one point, and the boy heals and comes back softened rather than hardened, still holding the only thing Becca managed to leave him, which is the ability to feel bad about what he can do. That is the exact thing Homelander spends years trying to burn out of him, and it is the exact thing that survives. The recruitment fails. He raises, without ever meaning to, a son who can still feel guilt, which turns out to be the one object in the world built to be turned against him. He rules everyone who isn't a parent or a son, and he rules each kind differently, and together they're a preview of how he'll rule a country. Below him are the subordinates, and they exist to be reminded that they're below him. A train, the fastest man alive, the one who killed Huey's girlfriend by running through her at full speed, spends years as something to mock, a man with a bad heart and a worse conscience, kept close mostly so there's someone to look down on. And the deep, who talks to fish and gets humiliated in every conceivable way, dragged through one indignity after another, is despised openly and kept anyway. Homelander eventually just says it plain, that he keeps the deep around precisely so the deep can feel worthless. That's not power for a purpose. That's power for the pleasure of having someone underneath you to remind that they're underneath you. And loyalty doesn't spare you, it just changes the flavour of the fear. Ashley runs Vought for him, does everything he asks, betrays anyone he points at, and it's eating her alive. So frightened of him that she's pulling her own hair out in fistfuls, a woman being physically consumed by proximity to the man she serves faithfully. That's what he does even to the people on his side. He doesn't reward loyalty with safety, because the fear isn't a response to disobedience, it's just the weather around him, and everyone in range gets weathered. Level with him is a shorter list, and it gets the opposite treatment because a rival who won't perform love is intolerable. Maeve knows exactly what he is, and she will not, no matter the cost, grovel, so he can't win her over and can't quite kill her. So he does the pettier, crueler thing and tries to break her, outing her private life on live television, dangling the people she loves as leverage, testing over and over whether he can finally make her bend. And Starlight is worse, because Starlight fights him for the very thing he needs, the public's love, becoming the clean face the country roots for, a rival brand he can't simply crush without proving to everyone he was never the hero. And then there's the one enemy who isn't on any list because he has no powers, no title, and no fear of dying. Butcher wants Homelander dead badly enough that his own death stops being a threat you can hold over him, and that is the one thing Homelander has never known how to fight. A man who can't be intimidated because he's already given himself up. Edgar held him with nerve. Butcher hunts him with the same nerve turned lethal, and it rattles him in a way none of the supers do, because you cannot manage a person who wants nothing from you except your end. And above all of them is the public, which gets the mask, the smile, the staged rescues, the whole manufactured romance, because the public is the audience whose love keeps the entire machine running. 4 kinds of people, one man. The ones beneath him exist to feel small, the ones beside him exist to be broken for not kneeling, the one hunting him exists as the fear he can't name, and the ones watching exist to adore. He learned to run a nation by practicing on a handful of people first, and then someone hands him the idea that turns all of that into a movement. Stormfront tells him the most dangerous thing anyone ever says to him, which is that he had the math wrong. You don't need everyone to love you, she tells him. You need enough of the right people, angry at the right things, and they will love you harder than the whole country ever did, and they'll love you for exactly the parts you used to hide. And it matters that it's her doing the teaching, because she's a literal Nazi, a century-old true believer who looks at a blonde god with a flag and sees the perfect vehicle for the oldest ugly idea there is. She doesn't hand him a politics. She hands him a family that ask nothing of him but his worst self. Then he tests it, and the test is a murder. A rally, a crowd, someone throws a bottle and it lands near Ryan, and Homelander turns and lasers the man who threw it in the open in front of thousands of people and every camera in the country. No cover story, no staged rescue, a god killing a civilian in broad daylight. And there's a silence, the long-held kind, where every old rule says, this is the end, this is where the country recoils, and it's finally over for him, and then the crowd cheers. Every family before this one asked him to be something, to perform, to be good, to be less. This one loves him more the worse he gets, and it's the first unconditional love he's ever been handed, and the only condition on it, the single one, is that he stop holding back. So he does. He says he's done apologizing, and he means it, because the mob just told him the truest thing anyone ever has, that he was always most loved at his most monstrous. And the family builds itself out from there into something that runs on its own. Propagandists like Firecracker feed the base a steady diet of grievance and turn his cruelty into a cause. Influencers and true believers spin up an entire ecosystem, and he discovers he can float the ugliest ideas in quieter language and let the movement launder them into something a crowd will chant. He doesn't have to be the villain out loud anymore. He has people for that now, a whole apparatus of devotion that hears what he means and says it for him, and a family that size stops being something he maintains and becomes something that maintains him, after that there's nothing left to hold him, and the story stops being about a man and becomes about a country, which he takes the way he does everything now, with paperwork and nerve instead of force. Sister Sage is the smartest person alive, and she's decided the smartest use of that is to dismantle a democracy from the inside, quietly, with its own machinery. They don't storm anything. That's the trick. They get their people into position. They lean on the compromised ones. They turn a crisis here and a legal process there into pressure points and squeeze. And every step of it looks like ordinary politics right up until it doesn't matter whether it was legal. And none of it works without the collaborators, the crowd of ordinary careerists who see exactly where this is going and decide it's someone else's problem, executives who sign the thing in front of them, officials who tell themselves there'll be a moderating influence from the inside, people with just enough power to slow it down and just enough self-interest not to. The coup doesn't need everyone to believe in it. It only needs the people in the room to want to keep their jobs more than they want to be the one who objects. And that, it turns out, is never in short supply. And he doesn't just take the offices, he takes the story, which is the part that makes it stick. The same machine that manufactured the hero gets turned to manufacturing consent, flooding the country with the version of events where he's the rescuer and the people resisting him are the threat. By the time force would have mattered, half the country is cheering for the thing being done to them because they were sold it as protection. A coup people beg for doesn't need soldiers, it needs a broadcast, and he already owned the broadcast. Because the thing about doing it slow and legal is that by the time anyone can name it as a coup, it's already done. There's no tank in the street to rally against, no single villainous moment to point at, just a steady accumulation of positions and favours and fear until one morning the country is his and nobody can find the day it happened. Force would have triggered resistance, patience didn't. He takes the most powerful office on earth and barely has to raise his voice, and once it's his, the mask he wore for the public isn't necessary anymore, because you don't perform for people you own. He dissolves the Seven, because a god at the head of a nation doesn't need a team. He needs subjects. He kills a sitting president for not being faithful enough in his heart, a phrase that should not be sayable about how a country is governed, and by now just is, and the people who say no get sorted into freedom camps, the phrase doing the work that phrase always does, dressing a place where dissenters disappear in the language of a holiday, and the fear stops being something that happens in boardrooms and becomes the air the whole country breathes. People learn to watch what they say near a television. Supers who spent years as heroes fall in line because the alternative is disappearing. And the ones who might have resisted look around, count the cost, and decide today is not the day. That's how it holds. Not with him personally in every room, but with the knowledge of him in every room. A single god's temper turned into a nationwide reflex to keep your head down and clap when you're told. But obedience was never actually the thing he was starving for, so the regime reaches past it into people's heads. He wants belief, the interior kind, real devotion and not just compliance, so he puts psychics to work at his own gatherings, screening the crowd for the ones whose loyalty is only on the surface, sorting the true believers from the merely obedient. A father doesn't want subjects who follow the rules. He wants children who love him, and he will turn a nation's worth of surveillance on the inside of their skulls to find the ones who are faking. It is the lab hunger scaled up to a country. At the end of the world, with everything, he is still checking to see if he's really loved, and to make sure nothing can ever threaten him again, he takes a dose of the original compound, the one that grants immortality, unkillable now on top of untouchable, the final upgrade, the last box checked. He stands on a stage as the father of the nation, immortal, adored, obeyed, holding everything the smile was ever for, and he is exactly as empty as he was in the windowless room in the lab, because you can't fill the shape of a parent with a country. For 5 seasons, everyone keeps asking the same question. How do you kill a god? How do you stop something that cannot be hurt? And his own last act as a free man was to answer it for them, to make himself impossible to kill. None of it matters, because his body was never the door. It cracks before the weapon ever arrives. On that Easter stage, in front of the whole country, he loses the thread. The speech comes apart in his hands, and the god starts improvising, promising to scorch the earth, to burn every non-believer, the need finally breaking the surface in public, the mask not just off now, but shattered live on air. The most controlled image ever manufactured, unspooling in real time, because the hole at the centre finally got bigger than the performance wrapped around it. And then his people finished the job the collapse started. They build the one weapon that can strip the power out of a body, and it comes down to Kimiko, who can't make it fire on rage no matter how hard she tries. It only comes when the grief takes over, when a vision of the man she lost reaches her, and she stops trying to hate hard enough and lets herself feel the loss instead. The thing that finally beats the god runs on love, not force. And the person who walks into that final room to end him is his son. Ryan, the boy he made in his own image, the last family he had, the conscience his father never managed to erase, having carried him all the way here. He's on the other side, he helps hold his father down, and it is not easy, even now, even with the plan. Homelander has taken the immortality serum, he is stronger than he has ever been, and the two of them can barely contain him. Butcher and the boy straining against a father who is still physically a god, the whole thing hanging on seconds. It takes everything they have just to hold him in place long enough for the blast to land, and the power goes out of him. On live television, in front of the nation he'd turned into his audience, the god becomes mortal for the first time in his life, and he begs. The most powerful being who ever existed, pleading for his life in front of everyone, offering anything, the need dragged all the way into the open at last. The exact thing he once killed a woman, merely for naming, now broadcast to the whole country, the believers in his church, the crowd that cheered the murders, the replacement he built his whole heart on. Watch him stripped and beaten and begging, and they don't rise, they don't fight, they file out in disgust. The love evaporates the second he's weak, which means it was never love, it was worship, and worship needs a god. Butcher lifts the crowbar, says it's for Becca, and kills him while the world watches the father of the nation die like the small, frightened thing he was grown to be. Not the mother, she was never real. Not the father, he was never coming. Just the son standing with the people who came to end him, and the crowd, the family that finally loved him, watching their god beg and doing nothing at all. Every bond he ever built to fill that hole gathered for the last scene, watching him die. So, the man or the power, the show won't let you take either exit. Call it the man, a bad seed rotten from the start, and Vought walks clean. The company that grew a child without a mother and handed him a country. Call it the power, the idea that anyone would rot with that much impunity, and he walks. Because love was on the table more than once, and he chose the camps every time. The unloved child was real. The unloved child still built the camps. Both are true, and neither one lets the other off. Ryan says it cleanest right at the end, when Butcher wants to be the hero for having swung the crowbar. Homelander being evil, the boy tells him, doesn't make you good, Power didn't pour the evil in, and it didn't invent it. It just took away, one restraint at a time, everything that had ever made him behave, until the only thing left holding him was the need to be loved, and then it handed him a crowd that loved him most, with nothing holding him at all. The smile was never the person, the smile was the leash, and he was always, from the very first frame, going to take it off.